AA Beyond Belief is a podcast by, for, and about people who have found a secular path to sobriety in Alcoholics Anonymous. I am here today with Marty B, and he is from Las Vegas, Nevada. Is that right, Marty?
Yeah, Boulder City, just outside Las Vegas.
Okay.
The town that built the Hoover Dam.
Oh, okay. I've been to Hoover Dam before. All right. So Marty is here to talk about a special interest group within Alcoholics Anonymous called Birds of a Feather, which exists to serve airline pilots, I believe. And so Marty's going to tell us all about it. Marty, can we begin with a little bit of background, like what is Birds of a Feather?
Birds of a Feather is kind of a loose organization. I hesitate to use the term group because General Service Office had said having a specialized meeting, if you call it a meeting, it's okay. So you really can't call it a group if you're going to. So, but the organization Birds of a Feather, it's actually aviation professionals in recovery, and we have it is each nest, which is what we call the meetings in a particular city, for example, is autonomous, and they have different requirements for membership, or I should say who they allow into their meetings. Some are very specific; it's only pilots. Some include management, aviation professionals from different parts of the industry, flight attendants, flight engineers. Here in Las Vegas, our nest in Las Vegas includes air traffic controllers.
Oh, interesting. Oh, yeah, I could see that.
And we do have a retired air traffic controller in England who is part of our international organization. So we have nests all over the world, from Dubai to New Zealand to the UK, as well as all over the country. And I don't have an exact list of a number of the nests right now, and it's been growing through the pandemic. With Zoom has been very beneficial to Birds of a Feather, and I get to see people on a weekly basis that I didn't get to see except once a year. We have an international convention, much like secular AA, and we have a newsletter that we send out quarterly. And it is a rather closed group, but as I said, it's loosely organized, so each meeting is autonomous. So.
Gotcha. So what's the history behind it? When did this start?
Well, it really started in the early 70s when there were pilots in recovery who decided they were going to take a chance and step out and declare, their recovery, their alcoholism and their recovery, which was very risky at the time because the FAA, a clinical diagnosis of alcoholism or a history of an excessive drinking habit would automatically disqualify an aviator from holding a medical certificate. So this includes private pilot, commercial pilot, anybody that's making a living flying an airplane. But it was really initially driven by airline pilots. And so they got together with their companies and convinced their companies that it was beneficial to the company to help a pilot get sober, get in recovery. Not only would it save them money in the long run, which is what it's really all about from the corporate standpoint, but that they would end up with a better employee. And from that grew a program which was called HIMSS, the Human Intervention and Motivation Study, which was for professional pilots and primarily airline pilots. And out of that group is when Birds of a Feather grew up. And part of that was also because it involved the military. And
so was that first group not an AA group? It was something just outside of AA or out of...
Correct. It wasn't really a group. It was an organization that became affiliated through the unions, the pilot unions. It was a cooperation between the pilot unions, the airlines, and to develop this program. And what we had is some pilots who'd gotten sober and in AA, like myself. And the FAA said, well, that's self-diagnosis, and that's none of our business. So then they said, well, we need a place where we can go. It's not affiliated with the company, not affiliated with the union. And of course, people got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And so that's how Birds of a Feather got started. And it started in the Pacific Northwest. And I think the first meeting was around 1975.
Wow, interesting. About the same time that secular AA meetings started.
Yeah, yeah. So I was fortunate. I got involved at 19. Well, I got sober at 90, and I was introduced to Birds of a Feather right around 92, I believe, in Phoenix. And I didn't know anything about it. My story involves, I got working on custody of my son, and I had gotten divorced, and I thought, oh, this drinking thing might come up in court. Maybe I should quit drinking. And I got involved in Alcoholics Anonymous through a friend of mine who I'd been in the military with, and he helped me get sober and point me in the right direction. And after a couple of hiccups, I got sober in June of 1990. So I was working for an airline at the time, and I had worked in Europe and in the East Coast, and it went out of business. And then I was hired by another airline in Texas. That's when I moved to Phoenix in 92, and that's when shortly after that is when I was introduced. I met somebody in a meeting, an AA meeting. I saw another pilot who I recognized, and I approached him after the meeting and talked to him, and he's the one who introduced me to Birds of a Feather. And that's when I first got involved in it in 92.
So did you have any issues with the airlines that you were working for because of your drinking?
Not really. I was, what do we say, a high functioning, In fact, I was promoted and given positions, responsibility, and I was designated as an evaluator.
So really good at hiding it. And a lot of us are.
Right, right. And one of the things with pilots, we had this rule of 8 hours. We call it 8 hours bottle to throttle. And we were to drink up to 8 hours. Well, if you drink alcoholically, 8 hours isn't a lot of time. But that was the rule, which kept a lot of people relatively healthy. But as you know, historically, as time went by, people were pushing that envelope. And, you've heard all the news stories about people getting caught and going through security and smelling like alcohol. That never happened to me, fortunately. And it was actually about a year sober, I was awarded full custody of my son. My ex-in-laws sent a letter to my company and said, we have information that he's alcoholic. So I had to go see a medical rehabilitation officer, one of his designations, a company doc. And I went to see him and told him my story. It's kind of funny because I told him my story and I was sober a year. And he was used to seeing people that were being dragged in with their lawyers until
right.
smelling like alcohol. And here's a guy who voluntarily went to AA, got sober, was a year sober. And so he gave me a physical and gave me a letter with the company letterhead on it. And it said, well, I've tested Bridges, blah, blah, blah. And he doesn't appear to have any problem. And, physically or da-da-da. And I don't see that he's an alcoholic. And so I got that letter. I framed it. And it was funny. I walked out of his office and called my sponsor, and we had a good laugh over that. But nevertheless, so I really didn't. And then I went back. I had talked to my chief pilot and my director of operations and explained my situation. They were very supportive. So when I went to the next company, I'd been sober a couple of years when I first got hired. And that's the company I retired from after 25 years. And I was involved in the union there, in this HIMSS program I talked about earlier, as a peer monitor and a mentor.
I think, there's something similar to that for attorneys.
Yes, absolutely. And physicians.
Yes, right.
Most places. In fact, my friend who had I was a B-52 gunner, and so was my friend in Southeast Asia. We came back, we went to college together, and he went into pre-med and eventually medical school, and he was an ER doctor. And he went through that program. He's the one who introduced me to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I didn't go through that. I never went to treatment. I was never clinically diagnosed. And without DUIs or anything documented, there is no documented history of a habit of excessive drink. So that's why it was never an issue with my company.
So what happens to a pilot now, or I guess any airline professional who has an alcohol problem and their employer becomes aware of it, they're not immediately dismissed, are they? Are they put through that program, or are they suggested to go to Birds of Feather? What approach is being taken?
Usually, when the company gets involved, by the time the company gets involved, there's been some event.
Yeah, something happened. You didn't show up for a flight, or you.
Usually, it has something to do with an overnight, when they're at a hotel somewhere overnight and a little bit too much to drink, even blackouts, people doing dumb things in blackouts, or, whatever, what we call odd and tragic behavior. So
Odd and tragic.
I think that's what it said in the book, but
Okay.
I practice some of that. It's usually that or a DUI.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I can see that because that would be reported, I guess, on up.
Things changed. It's probably going back about 10 years ago, but some things changed within the FAA, and they became to scrutinize this more. And if you had a DUI, if it was a minor, there's different levels of DUIs. I guess there's excessive, and so if it was a minor one, they may look at it and look at your past, and if there's nothing there, they may decide, well, it's okay, we'll let you go this time. It's recorded. If it's excessive, I forget what they call it. I think it's excessive or something like that. Extreme, yeah, extreme. Then they'll probably immediately say, okay, you need to go to treatment and go into the HIMSS program. They don't. The FAA doesn't mandate AA. They can't, right, legally. But the aeromedical examiner may. But they certainly are very happy when people go to AA. They really like to see people in a 12-step program. And most AMEs are educated now about the AME. Oh, I'm sorry. An AME is an aviation medical examiner. They're designated by the FAA. These are independent doctors who are designated through some training by the FAA to give pilots their physical. And there are specific AMEs that deal with the HIMSS program. That's another level of qualification, so to speak. So certification. And they handle specifically pilots in recovery. And they're kind of educated through an organization that runs these conferences for them about Birds of a Feather. And Birds of a Feather's got a very good reputation with the FAA and with these aeromedical examiners and people in recovery.
Are the meetings, a lot of them, I'm kind of imagining they're probably centered around cities that have airports, large airports?
Yes, most often. They're usually centered around cities that have domiciles for certain airlines. Here in Las Vegas, I can tell you that we have retired military pilots, we've had active duty, we have private, I think we have 3 guys right now who are trying to get their private pilot license. So they're not professionals at all. They're just trying to get that. They had DUIs, and the FAA said this is what you got to do. So, but the reason we're here is because it's a major domicile for 2 or 3 airlines.
Yeah, and I imagine that because pilots are traveling, at least commercial airline pilots, and I guess other kinds of pilots are. You're traveling, you're probably staying in different places overnight, and these meetings must be kind of interesting because I'm sure that you must have like a group of regulars that are there, but you must have people that fly in every so often and connect up with the group.
Yeah, occasionally we do. We don't have a meeting place right now in Las Vegas. The hospital we used closed down during the pandemic and went out of business. So, and we haven't been meeting face to face, so we're just doing Zoom. But that is true. So we have a list, we have a website, and on the website is listed all the different nests and the contact phone numbers. And we always say, if you're in a city and you're overnight, you call a number, somebody will come and get you. If it's not on the night of the actual nest meeting, still we're members of Alcoholics Anonymous, and we will come and get you and take you to an AA meeting if you'd like.
So COVID and the Zoom meetings has been a boon for you.
Absolutely, absolutely, especially for our international. I mean, we have groups in New Zealand and Australia, and we have meetings twice a month with them, and I have new lifetime friends there that I haven't met face to face that I see on a regular basis, and and we've had a lot of people get sober in the time of Zoom.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, it is fascinating. Guys that have come out of treatment,
And so their first meeting is to log on to a computer.
so it's been great, and I think it's going to really be good for our type of organization
Yeah.
because we're going to continue to have Zoom meetings even after. We've already talked about it.
It's easier to find each other, and geography doesn't matter anymore. You can, yeah, that's great. And we're seeing the same thing with secular AA meetings as well. I mean, a new Zoom meeting seems to be popping up every day, a couple of them.
Yeah, I'm looking to get to more of those as well.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're probably finding pilots or in airline professionals that are just wanting to be in a meeting with people who understand the different issues that they face in their recovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what are those? What is unique? What are the special issues that once you're sober, you're in recovery, you're a pilot. What do you deal with that it's where it's helpful to have a meeting specifically where you're with other pilots?
Well, the first thing is that because of the rules of the Federal, Aviation Administration, a lot of people were driven underground by it. And so they're hesitant to talk about things like where they work or what they do for a living. That makes
sense. Yeah, you wouldn't want to go to a meeting where just with the general public and have people, be alarmed or whatever.
Right.
So
right.
You were the guy just flying me last time.
Yeah. We lived in Scottsdale for years. I spoke at a noon meeting once. It was a pretty big meeting in Scottsdale, and I told my story, and I worked overseas a lot too, and worked in Africa and some third world countries, and I have some interesting stories. So, after the meeting, this woman came up to me and she goes, and at the time I was probably 7 or 8 years sober. And she said, "Boy, I don't know if I'd want you flying my airplane." And I said, "Well, do you want the two guys who were in the bar till 2 a.m.?"
Right.
So they don't. So they give you a look like you got a third eye, and that's what when you sit down in a meeting with birds of a feather, we understand each other. We're sober.
And that's like the same thing with physicians as well, because you have that reputation with the public. And the public kind of probably puts you up on a bit of a pedestal because, like a physician, you have people's lives, in your hands there as you're flying them from point A to point B. When we were talking to a physician, he mentioned that the recovery rate, the success rate, the percentage of people who stay sober is like 95% or something. It's a huge number for them because they have this motivation. Their whole career depends upon it, and they're so closely monitored. Is that the same with pilots?
It is. There was a time, and I'm pretty certain that the physicians program was designed after the pilots program.
Oh, interesting.
And we had a higher rate of recovery than physicians.
Wow, isn't that interesting?
But I think that they've surpassed us by percentage points. Like we're like 93%. I can tell you that one of the real motivating factors. Well, I've always said that, or should I say, I've heard that one definition of a bottom is when you're about to lose something more important to you than the alcohol. And it was like when I was trying to get custody of my son, and I was thinking, well, this is what I have to do. Of course, that didn't keep me sober. That's what we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous. I got to get sober for myself, or I can be sober for anybody else. But pilots truly identify with what they do very strongly, and we love what we do. And when that is threatened, it's a big motivator. Having said that, I know some pilots who, after they retired, went back to drinking. And, as we know what happens, the guy that sits down and puts on his slippers, the story in the book, and he's dead shortly afterwards.
Back in the 80s when Reagan was busting up the air traffic controllers union, there was a lot in the news about the stress involved with being an air traffic controller. I mean, it might even be more stressful than being a pilot because you have all these planes in the air that you need to keep straight. and it's probably not always so easy. Probably as a person who flies on a plane, I probably don't want to know how what's going on back there. But that, when you mentioned that some groups would allow air traffic controllers, and that kind of makes sense to me, because wouldn't they be facing the very same issues as a pilot?
Absolutely. And the rules are a little different for the air traffic controllers, but I do agree that it's a highly stressful job. I think it is more stressful than flying the airplane because we're flying one airplane and they're controlling hundreds, especially if you're somewhere like Los Angeles or Chicago, New York, very stressful. And I think there's a high level of drinking, you know. That's why we haven't been very successful. We've had a few air traffic controllers come and go in our meeting, but
I wonder if that does have to do, because you mentioned that your union kind of worked, kind of, the whole this thing started with the union kind of getting involved. I wonder if the air traffic controllers, if they don't have a strong union, if that might be part of their problem.
I've known people that got sober and kept their jobs. They're off for a while and then they go back, but they're like, again, they're not under the same scrutiny as the FAA is.
As a pilot is.
I don't
And
know why.
yeah, you think they should be. And then, of course, you said some groups will allow, or some meetings will allow flight attendants as well. Okay.
Yes.
And again, I guess, they also have that public persona, and that's the thing is, when I was talking to the physician and even the teacher, we don't always stop to think about how the public views us because of our profession. If you're a doctor, they assume that you've got everything under control. If you're a pilot, you've got things under control. People like to think that, and they don't allow these people just to be human like everyone else, and understand that they have human failings and human problems just like everybody else. And maybe it freaks them out a little bit.
Yeah, I think so. And only recently, in the recent past, and I'm probably backing up 5 to 8 years, maybe a little longer, is when they first finally approved an antidepressant
Oh,
for
really?
pilot. And it's a requirement where the pilot has to stay grounded for a year
Really?
while he takes it before they.
Well, that is really interesting, because there really isn't any side effects from an antidepressant.
Right. I know it's the FAA's very. That's the way they do things. So
Right, right.
and I'm sure the traveling public would agree.
Just being extra cautious, I guess.
And they really shined the spotlight on it with the accident was in Europe, and there was an airline where the captain left the cockpit and the co-pilot crashed the airplane.
Yeah, I think I remember that. I remember that was a few years ago. He actually, it was like they suspect it might have been a suicide.
Yeah, it was an Austrian or German. I forget exactly which the name of the airline, but
Yeah, so then they're thinking that, mental issues are an issue by themselves. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're being treated for depression, they're going to take a closer look at you.
like you said, we're human beings. So
And it's really better to come out and open. When you were talking about in the beginning how Birds of a Feather started, and it's much better for you to be out in the open with the airline saying, yes, I've done something about my problem, rather than if you hide it. Because if you're just hiding in the shadows, you could successfully be drinking, the entire time, and be a raging alcoholic, and the airline will never know, and you could, and just because you might not be trashed when you're getting on that plane, you might still be a bit impaired. I know that was the case with me. My drinking, lingered on, after for a while. So yeah, it's much better to be out in the open as far as, working with the airlines.
yes, I agree. It's interesting when like I said, I had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'd gone through this evaluation where the doctor determined I was okay, but I still had this lingering thing in the back of my mind that maybe they'd come after me, and I had some fear wrapped around that, even though I was sober. So we have these conventions in different cities, just like secular AA, and we had the convention at the time I was living in Phoenix, and we were in the convention in Phoenix. and we have a banquet with a speaker on Saturday night, and I was sitting there with the head psychiatrist of the FAA. Interesting guy. His name's Bart Packle. He's retired since. He's really a pilot advocate and an advocate of Alcoholics Anonymous and Birds of a Feather. Just a side note. It was interesting in a convention. He was speaking to doctors and medical examiners and psychiatrists, and he said, basically said what really works is Alcoholics Anonymous. And he said that I've learned a lot from pilots in recovery, from 12-step programs, and which I thought was fascinating. But I'm sitting at the table with this guy, and I'm thinking, oh my God, he's going to find out I'm sober. Well, I'm at a convention with 80 sober pilots. Why else would I be there? And then they called me up to the podium because that was my 7th anniversary that day, and they gave me a chip. It was a very, very emotional experience. And
Yeah.
I said, well, the cat's out of the bag, and I was talking to Bart afterwards, and he goes, well, he said, you self-diagnosed. You're not the problem, So he said, not my business. And I think that's interesting. So that was a huge relief for me. But it was all in my head, like so many of our fears, right?
I was going to ask you about how Birds of a Feather interacts with the rest of the fellowship.
Yeah, we're kind of, my Phoenix Nest, we met for a while at an Alano Club. We had a meeting in a room in an Alano Club, and now and then we would have somebody would walk in the room that needed a meeting. And it was part of our group conscious. If that happened, we would have a group conscience, we would accept them, and we would adjust the topic accordingly for whoever came in that needed a meeting. Most of the time, we tend to find a place that's isolated. Like we were working at this hospital that's since closed down, and in the room right next to us was a meeting for medical professionals, pharmacists and PAs and nurses and doctors. So, at times we're criticized for being exclusionary, but it's just the nature of the meeting.
Right. No, that makes sense to me. The medical professionals meeting here, of course, they're probably not meeting in person now, but they also meet in a place. They don't meet in a Alamo Club. They don't meet in a church basement. They meet someplace where it kind of is exclusive for the medical professionals, people to make sure that they have a safe place where they can meet. Because what happens is if everybody shows up, it's no longer a medical professionals meeting, or it's no longer a Birds of a Feather meeting.
And it was anonymity driven. It always was.
Yeah, sure.
And, we like to say that, well, your anonymity should be protected, but we know that's not always the truth.
Anonymity is probably extremely important, isn't it, for the pilots?
Especially for pilots that get sober in Alcoholics Anonymous that don't go to treatment and don't get into the HIMSS program. So because that program is pretty punitive and very expensive. But I think there's fewer and fewer of us that got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. Usually we're guys with 30 plus years sobriety. Almost everyone goes through treatment now. I would say almost 100%. And once you go into treatment, whether you have a DUI or not, you're clinically diagnosed, and then you have to go through the HIMSS program. And I would say that most large percentage of people, it's DUI driven.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I mean, that's how they're going to find out. I mean, that's what happened. That's how I got my bottom was I had a job where I was repossessing cars for a bank. And so I had to drive the bank's cars after I took them. And they knew I had a couple of DUIs, and they told me, if you ever get another one, you're out of here, or you better be honest with us. Well, I wasn't honest with them. They found out. So yeah, employers will find out when you get DUIs, and if they don't want you to have one, they'll.
I think, again, the rules changed, and you have to disclose it to the FAA and then to your company.
And you better too, because if you don't, they'll find out.
Yeah, and it's a good thing. Occasionally someone will get a DUI, just, someone who's not alcoholic. They'll just be over the limit. They'll be driving back from a company party or something. But most of the time, if it's extreme or it's your second DUI, it's usually, statistically, you're one of us. So.
So are you guys having a conference this year? Or are you doing something online?
We had ours this year. We had it on Zoom. It was scheduled to be in Toledo, Ohio. We usually schedule our annual international conference in the same city as the AA International. So, every 5 years, so it was going to be in Detroit, and we had a pilot in Toledo, and that's where we set it up. And of course, it didn't happen. So we did it on Zoom. Our next one is next summer in June, is in Windsor. It's in the United Kingdom,
Oh,
just outside London. So we're really excited about that.
nice. Nice. That'll be in June.
Yeah, we have a small contingent in the UK.
Well, hopefully by then that you'll be able to make it over there.
Yeah, I hope so.
You know,
We're
that's
hoping so.
that's one thing I meant to ask you that I wanted to ask you that I forgot. We talked about how COVID was helping your meetings, but is it? I mean, because people aren't flying right now, is that causing extra stress or pressure for people like that work for in the airline industry and pilots in
Oh,
particular?
absolutely.
Yeah, it's got
It's
to be
job
difficult.
security.
Oh my God, yeah.
Highly stressful.
Oh
And
yeah.
I was talking to a neighbor who is not in aviation, but he's retired, and he was talking about, well, I've been kind of drinking more than I usually do.
I can see
I
that.
said, well, there's an underlying stress, um, and we self-medicate. And I was talking to him about it, and it's not abnormal. And I think that happens in any industry, but especially the airlines. It's very stressful right now, especially for junior people. And if they're sitting around and they're not flying much, they fly a little bit, not because the schedules have been reduced by 70%.
Yeah. You know what I heard though? I heard that it's actually safer to be on a plane with COVID than it is like in any other sort of a room because of how the air gets circulated in the cabin.
That is correct.
Isn't that
It
interesting?
it is because it comes out from the top and it goes to the bottom and it goes from the front to the back. So the way the air goes down, unless somebody, but if somebody's sitting there hacking away, they're
Right. Yeah. It's probably, yeah. It's not like 100% safe, but it's a little safer.
but also the air in the cabin is recirculated, but only about 40% of it gets recirculated, and it goes through very uh, what's the word, hyperallergenic filters, but the air in a plane is changed out frequently as compared to an office building.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Because when this first happened, I thought, yeah, boy, the last place you want to be is in a plane. But as it turns out, they're actually safer. You'd be better off in a plane than you would maybe in some offices.
Yeah, that's true. As long as somebody's not coughing on you.
Right? Exactly. 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 Yeah. When it's that's just you get not much you can do about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, but that's going to happen anywhere. But yeah, there is a misunderstanding about the recycled air, and the air is changed out in the cabin. The actual fuselage actually of the airplane is pressurized and it leaks. I mean, air actually leaks out. So it's like you're constantly pumping fresh air into the airplane, and like they do recycle some of it, which helps to save on fuel, and so.
Oh, that
But
makes
only,
sense.
and I'm not sure I've retired for 3 years, so I'm not sure the procedures they're using, but I'm willing to bet they've turned off the recirculation fans.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'll have to ask a friend of mine. So they turn off the recirc fans, and then so it's all fresh air.
Well, I'm glad that Birds of Feather exists, and I'm glad that it's growing with Zoom. I could imagine with what's going on with just the economy and everything in the airline industry that you might have more people showing up at those meetings now.
Absolutely.
And that's great that you're still having your conferences too. You're involved with the secular AA thing, and we're going to try to have, I guess, some sort of an online conference. I hope that thing goes off very well. How did you guys manage that? Were you part of organizing that?
Yes.
Were you really?
Uh,
Wow.
yeah. Yeah. It was. Well, normally we would get together. It's usually a 4-day affair. We get there on Thursdays, and we have events planned on Friday and Saturday. And we have professional speakers, and we also have social events. We were going to go out into a ball game on Friday in Toledo and see the Toledo Mud Hens. and that was all set up. And but that stuff you can't do. So we're limited to. We actually had a 1 day, and also we talked about you can only sit in front of a Zoom screen for so long, and you've just had enough, you know. So I said, well, we started the day with an AA meeting, and we had a business meeting, and then we would have a professional speaker, break for lunch. We would have another professional speaker, and these are people in aerospace medicine and psychology, and sometimes they talk about the disease concept.
Oh, kind of similar to what we're planning on doing with our conference.
Yeah, exactly. And then we would end with our banquet speaker. So we'd have our main speaker, and so we were done by 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah, shorter is better.
Too much to ask.
Oh yeah, for a Zoom meeting.
You start losing people. You can only sit in front of a computer for so long.
Oh, I know. I can't stand it. I went to our area assembly was on Zoom, and I no longer have to do that anymore, thank goodness. But yeah, I'm like, half my day is spent, sitting here looking at a Zoom meeting. And what was really funny is right after that was done, I had another Zoom meeting. I think actually with the secular AA board. It's like, I just really can't deal with this.
Yeah, I know. I hear you.
Well, it was really nice to talk with you, Marty. And thank you for coming on and letting me know about Birds of Feather, how it started, what it does. I think it's really interesting, and I'm really glad that it exists. I imagine that, knowing AA the way that I do, it's a really valuable resource. And I know how powerful it is to find your own tribe, to find someone who understands who's been in your shoes and understands where you're coming from. That's the magic. So that's to AA's credit that it allows groups like this to exist under the AA umbrella.
That is correct. And, some people find their way into Alcoholics Anonymous through Birds of a Feather. And then, we encourage people to say to strengthen your recovery, it's to always go to regular meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. We talk about, identification being a key factor in recovery in AA, that I can identify with another alcoholic in the room. And that's important. So
yeah,
whatever gets them in and keeps them in, I think is beneficial.
Well, thanks for listening to another episode of AA Beyond Belief, the podcast. I really enjoyed that conversation with Marty and learning about Birds of a Feather. Really sounds like a great organization, and I'm glad that something like that exists in this world. It's certainly needed. If you would like to help out our website and podcast, there's a couple of ways you might want to do that. Go on over to our Patreon page at patreon.com/AABeyondBelief and become a patron. We're starting to give out some extra perks now for just $1 a month donation, $5 a month donation, whatever you can afford. Also, you can join our YouTube channel now and get extra perks by becoming a member of the YouTube channel. Just a couple of ways that you could help out if you so desire. We'll be back again next Wednesday. We'll be posting another episode. And on Friday, I'll be doing the live stream with Angela. So stay tuned for that. We'll be back real soon. Bye-bye.